I've been living alone lately. To be honest, I've grown to prefer being alone. It's a bit embarrassing to admit, but it's because I've found a new lover. My husband was a high earner with a construction certification before he went to New Zealand. We have a son, and as he approached the upper grades of elementary school, we planned to send him abroad early for his education. My husband was excited about the prospect of using his certification for investment immigration, but I found myself increasingly reluctant to go to such a distant country. My husband promised that he would only need to be with our son for about 7 years, and once our son entered university, he would return to our home country. With that promise, he and our son departed for New Zealand. In return, I agreed to visit New Zealand once a year. I sent my beloved boys to the faraway land of New Zealand, trusting that my husband, who loved our son dearly and got along well with him, would raise him well. I agreed with my husband's suggestion that if by any chance our child, who was sent abroad for early education from a young age, was exposed to any danger, it would be overwhelming for me to cover up any unfortunate incidents if I went with him. After my husband and son left, I found that living alone simplified my household chores. I was relieved to hear that my son was doing very well when I contacted him. I was busy with work at the company I was working for, and when I came home, I barely managed to prepare a proper meal, quickly ate something, and went to bed. I diligently sought work, fearing that thinking only about my beloved men might make me depressed. At first, I met friends I hadn't been able to see while I was working. It was incredibly liberating to not have to prepare meals for my husband and son over the weekend. I even invited friends over, chatted to my heart's content, and hosted sleepovers. After a few months of this lifestyle, I felt that I had met all the friends I wanted to meet and that I was done socializing, so I didn't meet anyone anymore. My husband and son said they were doing very well in the great outdoors in New Zealand, and particularly, my son was much happier studying there than in our home country. I was glad to have sent them to New Zealand when I heard that my husband was also doing well at work. However, I was curious whether they were managing to cook properly, so I asked my son, who said his father was cooking by searching the internet. He also said that they had become friends with other student families in the area and that the mothers of his friends sometimes gave them side dishes. But then, my husband's contacts started to dwindle. I started to get a little angry, wondering if he wasn't worried about me. Living alone in this era when you can call anyone anytime via the internet. One day, I found a diary in my husband's study. I was so shocked by the story that I couldn't say anything. The story was that my husband's ex-girlfriend had asked him to come quickly to New Zealand to live with her. That's why he had taken our child and gone to New Zealand. I was trembling and thought about calling my husband, but I decided that I couldn't just let this happen. Our house has 3 rooms, a living room, and a bathroom in the main building, and 1 room and a small bathroom in the annex. The annex was used when guests came. This time, when my husband went to New Zealand, my mother-in-law said she was worried about her daughter-in-law living alone, so she introduced our house to her friend's grandson, Michael, who was working at a company near our house. We had never rented to anyone else before, but this time, we had the opportunity to bring in the reliable Michael to take care of the house and help with the tuition fees for studying abroad, which would be a two birds with on a stone situation, she said. I relayed my mother-in-law's suggestion to my husband, and he was pleased with that. The rooms were empty anyway, and the rent would provide some income, he reasoned. I was furious at the thought of my husband, who had run off to his ex-girlfriend, acting so nonchalantly. But I knew my husband wouldn't skimp on our son's education, so I forced myself to calm down and decided to follow my mother-in-law's advice. Michael, who moved into our house, was 28 years old. He was working as an employee in a large corporation near our house and was quite handsome. His parents must have been stunning as well. The moment I saw Michael, I commented on his good looks with a smile, and then immediately bit my tongue. I had foolishly revealed my true feelings. The more I got to know Michael, the more charming he became. I ordered Chinese food for him as he moved his belongings and came over to our house. As we chatted, I found him to be very kind and gentle. He clearly had been brought up well by his parents. I had developed a routine of hastily preparing dinner after work, having a beer alone, and then going to bed. A month after Michael began living in our house, it was my birthday. I wanted to meet my friends, but they were all busy being mothers. As I was considering going shopping alone, I ended up watching tea at home when Michael rang the doorbell. In his hand was a small cake box. With a smile, Michael said, "Madame, it's your birthday today, isn't it? Congratulations." I left work early to get this cake. When I asked how he knew it was my birthday, he explained that he had seen it marked on the calendar in the living room when he was moving in. I thanked Michael profusely and suggested that we go out for dinner if he had time. We changed clothes and had dinner at a restaurant near our house. Then we went to a beer house for a second round. We found that we had a lot in common and, surprisingly, worked in the same industry. Under the dim lights, Michael looked incredibly handsome. I thought of my husband, who had taken my son to New Zealand to see his ex-girlfriend, and I decided to make a move that night. I saw no reason to keep suffering alone. When I asked Michael if he had a girlfriend, he said he didn't. He had one in college, but they broke up while he was preparing for job applications, and he hadn't had any interest in dating since he started working. Perfect. This was my chance. In a rather brazen, middle-aged woman way, I asked, "What about me?" Michael looked surprised and said, "I've always liked the quiet, domestic type, like you." When I asked how he knew whether I was quiet or not, he responded, "Don't you just go to work and come home? Isn't that right?" I wanted to tell Michael about my husband's secret, but I was afraid of showing any flaws. So I said, "I'm thinking about getting a boyfriend now. 3 out of 10 of my friends have boyfriends." Michael was shocked and asked if such people really existed. I asked Michael candidly how he could be so naive and survive in this world, why he had remembered my birthday, and asked him to be honest with me. Michael hesitated for a moment before confessing that he had been smitten with me since the first day he saw me. He said he was impressed by how slim, pretty, and well-kept I was, even though I was a mother. He had ordered a homemade cake from a shop near his office because he thought I would probably be alone on my birthday, and he wanted to surprise me. He said he never thought he would fall for an older woman, especially a married one. That night, we affirmed our feelings for each other and hurried home. Michael was more masculine and healthier than my husband. We made love once more that night. Michael told me he was surprised that we could get along so well, despite our age difference, and he expressed his desire to spend every day with me while living in our house. We had midnight dates on dangerous days and made love almost every day when we didn't. One day, my son called me. He was excitedly telling me about a woman named Jenny who was bringing him side dishes that tasted fantastic. I felt a crushing headache. Jenny? That was the name I had seen in my husband's diary. When I asked my son when Jenny started coming to our house, he said she had brought side dishes shortly after they arrived in New Zealand and had made him promise to keep it a secret from me. He said Jenny cooks as well as I do, making any Korean dish he asks for, like stir-fried glass noodles, mustard greens, and medicinal nourishment. So I asked him how often Jenny comes, and he said he wasn't sure, but that she comes at least twice a week. When I asked where Jenny's house was, he said it was very close. When I asked if Jenny had a child, he said he didn't know, but he thought she lived alone. And when I asked if his father goes to work every day, he said he sometimes works from home. The puzzle pieces fit together. When my son was at school and my husband was working from home, it was clear that he and Jenny must have met. And it seemed like Jenny, who lives alone, was playing the role of a mother to my son. I felt betrayed and lived a married life with Mitchell, who lives next door, as if to show off. I decided to endure until my son became an adult. If I granted him a divorce, my husband would have no reason to return from New Zealand, and my son, who had adapted to life there, would not want to come back to Korea. If he came back to Korea at an awkward time and had to prepare for college entrance exams again, it would be obvious that he would not be able to do anything. So I decided to endure a little bit for my son. I no longer send rent to my husband. I have no reason to collect rent and send money to New Zealand under the pretext of my son's tuition, because I no longer have a reason to do so. It was up to my shameless husband to take care of the tuition and living expenses. He asked why I wasn't sending money, and I evaded the question by saying I didn't have any spare money because I was paying for a new insurance policy. I decided that there was no reason to continue sending rent to my husband, who had not only gone to see his ex-girlfriend, but also introduced her to my son. My mother-in-law seems curious about how well I'm doing without my husband, but since she lives far away, she can't suddenly visit, and even if she does visit, she can't come into the house first because she doesn't know the door lock password. That's because I changed the password after my husband left the country. However, when my mother-in-law comes to our house to perform ancestral rites or on holidays, I send Michelle to the love room and greet her. A few days ago, I got a call from my husband. He says to come and visit New Zealand in a few months. I plan to take my husband's diary and the original recording of my conversation with my son with me. I'm getting curious about what my husband will say then. I feel bitter that I seem to be becoming the same kind of person because of my husband's infidelity. But I plan to continue my relationship with Mitchell.